The notification didn't buzz. It didn't ring. It just appeared. Account restricted. Frank Delaney stared at the screen like it might blink first. It didn't. He refreshed the app. Same message. He logged out. Logged back in. $0 available. Not low. Not pending. 0. The kitchen was quiet except for the soft scrape of his chair on tile. The coffee in his mug had gone cold, but he didn't notice. He was 79 years old. He'd built his savings slowly, brick by brick, paycheck by paycheck, decades of construction work under Arizona's sun, 46 years of concrete and calloused hands. And now? Frozen. His thumb hovered over the red banner again. Suspicious activity detected. He laughed once. Short. Dry. Suspicious, he muttered to the empty room. The only suspicious thing about Frank Delaney was how predictable he was. Grocery store on Wednesdays. Gas station on the corner. Utility bills on autopay. One annual donation to the local veterans group every November. That was his rhythm. His pattern. Apparently, his pattern had betrayed him. Customer service picked up after 19 minutes. Sir, your account has been flagged by our fraud detection algorithm. Why? Frank asked calmly. There was unusual transaction behavior. I paid my contractor. Pause. For what, sir? A ramp, he said. For my front porch. Another pause. The representative typed. Yes, sir. That transfer appears to have triggered a risk review. I moved money from checking to savings first, Frank added. Then paid him. That transfer sequence differs from your historical behavior. Frank blinked slowly. So because I planned ahead, he said carefully. I'm suspicious? I understand this is frustrating. No, he said quietly. You don't. 7 to 10 business days. That's what they told him. 7 to 10 days without access to his life savings. Mortgage autodraft pending. Medication refill due. 7 to 10 days because a computer didn't like his sequence. Across town, in a glass-walled editing suite filled with warm light and muted music, Will Smith leaned back in his chair, reviewing footage for a documentary project on tech ethics. He'd been studying algorithms lately, how they shape outcomes, how they decide who gets approved, who gets flagged, who gets filtered out. His phone lit up. Frank D. He smiled immediately. Frank had been his neighbor years ago, the man who used to fix broken fences without being asked, who once told a teenage Will, if you're going to build something, build it to last. Will answered, Frank, what's good? Silence on the other end. Then Frank's voice, steady but heavy. Apparently, I am. Will's smile faded. Talk to me. Frank explained the freeze. The ramp. The transfer. The algorithm. Will didn't interrupt. He just listened. You ever been flagged by a computer? Frank asked quietly. Will exhaled slowly. No, he said. But I've seen what happens when nobody questions one. Frank hesitated. I don't want special treatment. You're not asking for special, Will replied. You're asking for sense. Will didn't call customer service. He called the bank's innovation division. Different tone. Different doors open. Within an hour, he was on a video call with the chief technology officer and head of fraud analytics. They looked confident, polished, prepared. Mr. Smith, the CTO began, our fraud detection system is designed to protect customers. From themselves? Will asked mildly. A flicker of discomfort. It identifies behavioral deviations. Will nodded. Walk me through the deviation. The analytics lead pulled up a screen share. Transaction timeline. Graph spikes. Behavioral baseline. Mr. Delaney typically maintains consistent liquidity in checking, she explained. This month, he transferred a larger-than-average amount to savings before issuing a contractor payment. That sequence mirrors certain fraud layering patterns. Will leaned forward. Layering patterns. Will leaned forward. Layering patterns. Yes. So your model saw a 79-year-old man building a wheelchair ramp and thought he was laundering money? The room shifted. It's not that simple. It rarely is, Will replied calmly. He let the silence stretch just long enough. Does your model account for aging? He asked. It accounts for age brackets. No, Will said gently. Does it account for aging? They hesitated. Meaning? Meaning life changes, he said. Mobility changes. Spending shifts. Health evolves. Does your algorithm understand context? Or just sequence? The analytics lead swallowed. It identifies risk probabilities. Based on what? Peer group modeling. Peer group of who? Will pressed. Retirees within his demographic cluster. Will nodded slowly. So if enough retirees get scammed, Your system tightens thresholds on all retirees. That reduces exposure. It also reduces dignity, he said quietly. That landed harder than raised voices ever could. Back in his kitchen, Frank sat staring at the wall. The red banner glowed on his phone like an accusation. He wasn't angry. He was small. That's what automation does when it moves without explanation. It shrinks you. His phone buzzed. Will. They're reviewing it, Will said. Frank sighed. I didn't want you to have to call. I didn't have to, Will replied. I wanted to. There was a pause. Frank, he added, voice steady. You're not suspicious. You're 79 and planning ahead. A soft chuckle came through the line. Planning ahead is illegal now? Only if you confuse a spreadsheet. Back on the video call, Will wasn't finished. I want to see the threshold model, he said calmly. That's proprietary. I'm not asking for code, he replied. I'm asking for logic. Silence. Our system triggers automatic freeze when risk probability exceeds 82%. 82% based on what weight distribution? More silence. The CTO leaned back. Our false positive rate is below industry average. How many of those false positives are over 70? Will asked. The analytics lead froze. That data isn't segmented in that way. Will's eyebrow lifted slightly. Then you don't know how disproportionately your model impacts elderly clients. That was the crack. Not dramatic. Just undeniable. Release his funds, Will said calmly. Pending review. That bypasses protocol. Yes, he replied. It restores access. The room went quiet. Then the CTO nodded slowly. We can authorize a temporary reinstatement. Good, Will said. And I'd like a demographic impact analysis run on your fraud model. Age segmented. False positive concentration. Freeze duration averages. You're requesting an audit. I'm requesting awareness. 2 hours later, Frank's phone refreshed. Balance restored. The red banner gone. He exhaled like he'd been holding breath all day. Will called. It's unlocked. Frank nodded slowly. You know what bothered me most? He said. What? They didn't call me first. That hit. They just assumed. Will leaned back in his chair, staring out at the Los Angeles skyline. Algorithms don't assume, he said softly. They calculate. Frank was quiet. And who teaches them what to calculate? He asked. Will smiled faintly. Exactly. A week later, the bank quietly updated a policy. Mandatory human review before freezing accounts for customers over 75. Context weighting added for seasonal payments and contractor transfers. It wasn't a press release. It wasn't viral. It was structural. And structural changes don't trend. They last. Frank stood on his new porch ramp, gripping the railing lightly. It was solid. Built to last. Will stood beside him. You didn't just unfreeze money, Frank said quietly. No. You made them look at the machine. Will nodded. That's the part nobody checks, he said. The machine feels neutral. So nobody questions it. That's how it slips past you. Not with drama. Not with sirens. Just quiet authority. A line of code making a call at 9:12 a.m., and a man staring at his phone like it betrayed him. Will stepped out onto his balcony that night, city air warm against his face. Traffic below moved in clean streams of red and white light. Systems everywhere. Patterns everywhere. Signals deciding who moves and who stops. He thought about something Frank said earlier. It breaks without a sound. That stayed with him. Because silence feels neutral. And neutral feels safe. And safe feels like you don't have to look closer. But silence is where assumptions hide. He pulled out his phone and called the bank again. Not for escalation this time. For structure. I want to understand your model governance, he said calmly when the head of risk answered. Who audits your bias drift? How often do you retrain? What's your override latency? There was a pause. Those weren't celebrity questions. Those were infrastructure questions. We perform quarterly recalibration, the executive replied. And between quarters? Monitoring thresholds. Monitoring is an intervention, Will said gently. Another silence. You built a machine to detect risk, he continued. Who built the machine that detects when your machine is wrong? That one settled heavy. Because now this wasn't about Frank. It was about architecture. In the analytics department, a whiteboard filled up fast the next morning. Override lag. Age impact clustering. Context weighting expansion. Human escalation window. Someone circled one phrase 3 times. Automatic freeze authority. Why does the system freeze before confirmation? A junior engineer asked. Because that's how we were trained to minimize loss, the senior modeler replied. And how much loss did Mr. Delaney cause? Silence. Numbers pulled up. 0. Then what were we minimizing? She asked. No one answered. Because sometimes the scariest thing isn't fraud. It's embarrassment. Frank didn't know about the whiteboard. He was at the hardware store, leaning on the counter, talking about weather patterns and lumber prices. He paid with his debit card. It processed instantly. No hesitation. No alert. Just a quiet beep of approval. He nodded once to himself. That beep used to feel automatic. Now it felt earned. Will drove out to see him again a few days later. They didn't talk about algorithms at first. They talked about music. About old cars. About how fast the world feels now. Then Frank said something unexpected. You ever notice how quick people are to trust what they don't understand? Will looked over at him. All the time. Frank folded his hands. When a person makes a mistake, we ask questions. When a machine makes one, we say it's complicated. That hit. Complicated has become a shield. A way to say, don't look under the hood. Will nodded slowly. That's why transparency matters, he said. Frank smiled faintly. Transparency's nice, he replied. But accountability's better. There it was again. That steady clarity. At the bank's headquarters, the board reviewed a new internal metric. Human confirmation rate before freeze, senior accounts. It had jumped from 12% to 91%. Fraud loss remained statistically flat. Customer complaints dropped. Brand trust surveys ticked upward. One board member leaned back. So we protected dignity without increasing exposure. The chief risk officer nodded. We just had to slow down. That's the part nobody likes to admit. Speed isn't always strength. Sometimes speed is avoidance. And slowing down reveals what you've been ignoring. Will spoke at a private roundtable with fintech founders a month later. No cameras. No headlines. Just founders, engineers, policy thinkers. You can't optimize empathy, he said calmly. But you can design space for it. A founder asked how. Interrupt the automatic, he replied. Insert a human checkpoint where the stakes are personal. He paused. Efficiency is impressive. Fairness is durable. The room was quiet. Not because they disagreed. Because they knew it was true. Back on his porch, Frank watched a storm roll in one evening. Wind picked up. Clouds thickened. He didn't rush inside. He just sat there, steady. He wasn't afraid of storms. He'd weathered enough. He thought about how close he'd come to feeling powerless. About how a red banner almost made him question his own stability. That's the thing about systems. They don't just control access. They influence identity. And when someone pushes back, they don't just unfreeze money. They recalibrate posture. Frank stood slowly and stepped down the ramp. Solid. Reliable. Built right. He smiled to himself. Machines will keep calculating. Banks will keep refining. Models will keep predicting. But somewhere inside that digital brain now, there's a pause before the lock. A question before the freeze. A voice in the process that says, look again. And that pause? That's where dignity lives. The sky cracked with thunder. Rain began to fall. Inside the house, lights glowed warm and steady. No alerts. No warnings. Just balance. And in a server room miles away, lines of code ran their nightly cycles. Not perfect. Not human. But finally designed to remember who they serve,